1 in 2 adults at some point in their lifetime are going to develop cancer. So this is a pretty alarming rise. As you say, we all know people who are either suffering from, who have suffered from, or who even have died from cancer. You mentioned at the start about soy. I have never covered on this podcast food and how it can help us with cancer, whether that's for prevention of cancer or potentially as part of the treatment regime for cancer. So I wonder if you could speak to a little bit about food and how we can think about that in terms of cancer prevention and treatment.
Yeah, well, so there's a whole field of research that was developed in the 1970s by a researcher named Dr. Michael Sporn from the National Cancer Institute, looking at the opportunity of intercepting cancer before it becomes a clinical problem. This whole idea of cancer prevention. Originally, it was looking at chemicals that could prevent cancer from starting at its early stages. Then it became angioprevention, which is, can we interfere with angiogenesis so the cancers actually can't grow a blood supply as a way of controlling it? And now we know that there's plenty of foods that have been studied that actually have been shown to be associated with the reduced risk of cancer, whether it's green tea, whether it's soy, whether it's tomatoes, whether it's stone fruit, peaches and plums. There's a plethora. In fact, I read about more than 100 different foods in my book, Eat to Beat Disease, that actually have various abilities to impact on angiogenesis towards health. Now, what I think is really amazing is how foods can be used during cancer treatment. And the reason that's so poignant, and I think for people listening who may know somebody undergoing cancer treatment right now, I mean, look, you're a doctor, we're both doctors. How many times has a patient who has cancer asked us very earnestly, hey, doc, I've got cancer, I'm getting treatment, I'm getting my chemo, but what should I be eating? Is there anything you can advise me to, right? That's such a common question. Yeah. It's a question that almost every cancer patient asks their doctor, and it's a question that almost no doctor can answer. So the typical response that a patient gets is incredibly frustrating and aggravating to them, because the doctors just say, yeah, you know what? Either they say, I don't know, there's nothing out there because no evidence on food can help, or they say, go eat whatever you want, go eat some junk food or some fast food because at least you get some nutrition. The most important thing is you don't lose weight. Well, actually, science has said both of those things are not true. Number one, actually cutting down on your caloric intake during cancer treatment actually reboots your health defenses to fight cancer. So intermittent fasting and manipulating your metabolism by lowering caloric intake actually is an anti-cancer strategy, number one. Number two, actually there are certain foods you can eat that actually can help you fight cancer. And the best, most compelling examples all have to do with your health defenses. So there is the newest form, most profound form of cancer treatment that's a biggest advance in 100 years for cancer treatment is immunotherapy. And immunotherapy, which is used everywhere, UK, North America, Russia, China, everywhere, is a new type of cancer treatment that doesn't poison the body like chemotherapy does. And it's not even a targeted therapy. That's like a heat-seeking missile you infuse into the body. Immunotherapy is a lot more simple and more natural in its concept. Hey, let's just use the body's own immune system and harness it to be able to destroy cancer. Because remember, we talked about this early on, like cops on the beat, the immune system conducts surveillance and takes out the bad guys, the drug dealers sitting on a street corner. Well, what happens if you had cancer, even if it's metastatic and spread? What happens when we allow your own immune system to do it? So this is now reality. Immune therapy is being given to cancer patients, and it allows your immune system to wipe out cancer. It is so dramatic that in about 20% of people, you get a phenomenal response. And in a smaller group of people, your immune system can wipe out cancer completely. I give an example of, in the US, one of our oldest living presidents is President Jimmy Carter. He's a peanut farmer. He came from the state of Georgia. When he retired from his presidency, when he finished his presidency, he went back to his sunny state, and he wanted to build houses with this nonprofit, this NGO called Habitat for Humanity. They spent a lot of time outdoors under the baking sun, building houses for homeless people. Okay. And in so doing, he got a lot of sun damage, which caused mutations in his skin, which led to skin cancer that spread to his liver and his brain. So he was in his early 90s when he was diagnosed with metastatic melanoma. And because it had spread, and melanoma is such a deadly cancer, most of his doctors basically said, this is game over. So he withdrew from public life. He wrote his own obituary, and it was about to sort of just, sort of meet his maker. And he became at peace with himself. But then at the 11th hour, he enrolled into a clinical trial of one of these immune therapies. It's something called a checkpoint inhibitor. And he got this infusion. And remarkably, at 90 years old, his own immune system reared up on its haunches and wiped out and did what it's supposed to do. It wiped out all the cancer in his brain, in his liver, all of his body. And he went from having metastatic cancer with brain metastasis. That's a game over kind of situation when you and I are training, to actually having no cancer. And he's alive today with no sign of cancer. Wow. Happened to my mother too, who had endometrial cancer, cancer in the lining of the uterus. It spread everywhere. And we put her on a immune therapy, same kind as the president did, former president. And in 3 treatments only over the course of 9 weeks, once every 3 weeks, no chemo. Okay. All of her 80-year-old immune system wiped out every bit of cancer in her body, and she's been completely cancer-free. This isn't even a cure. This is a reset. This is getting back to baseline, restoring health, because that's what your body's supposed to do.
This is kind of really full circle to what we were talking about at the start of this conversation, isn't it? The body's resilience, the body's natural ability to, patrol itself and actually repair damage and be resilient. And it's incredible now that you're talking about these drugs that are being used to really help support the immune system. But I think what you're coming to is that food can also do that as well. Is that right?
Yeah. Yes, but it's sort of the combination. So remember I said that for this type of immunotherapy, 20% of people have these really amazing responses, which means that the majority don't. And for a long time, we were scratching our heads saying, okay, what's going on? Because there's nothing more frustrating than a breakthrough that only works for a small proportion of people. We've got to use science to figure out what makes the difference. Well, so one of my colleagues, Dr. Laurence Zipvogel in Paris, she's at the Institut Gustave Roussy, which is one of the big cancer research centers of Europe, looked at 200 patients with different types of cancer, all getting immune therapy. And she looked at compared every dimension that she could between people who responded and people who did not respond very well to immunotherapy. And you know what she found? The difference was one bacteria in their gut. It wasn't genetics, it wasn't body size, wasn't obesity, it wasn't concomitant disease. It was actually one bacteria. That bacteria is Akkermansia muciniphila. Now, this is out of the 39 trillion bacteria in the body. This one has been studied and it's stuck out. It's kind of like finding a fossil in the hillside. There's probably a lot of fossils, but she found this one. This bacteria was present in responders. And if you had this, you responded to immune therapy and had a better outcome with cancer. And if you didn't have it, man, your outcome was not good. So how do you get this bacteria to grow? Well, it turns out it's all about your diet, because there's no probiotic you can take for Akkermansia. Akkermansia can be grown. You can grow Akkermansia in your gut by having by eating foods that help your gut secrete mucus. Now, that sounds disgusting to a lot of people. It's gross, mucousy gut. But in fact, our gut naturally secretes mucus, just like our mouth normally secretes saliva. And this bacteria, Akkermansia, its full name is Akkermansia is just its first name. Its last name is muciniphila. So Akkermansia muciniphila means it loves to grow mucus. Yeah. So when you actually eat foods like pomegranates, or pomegranate juice, or cranberries, or Concord grapes, or the juice from these, it prompts your gut to secrete healthy mucus. It's kind of like fertilizer in the soil. Your garden's going to love to grow better. That Akkermansia grows there. It actually makes you a responder. So that actually is a difference of how foods can make the difference in one bacteria. Now, 2 weeks ago, a landmark paper was published in the journal Science, which is one of the big, credible scientific journals, major scientific journal. This is like an 80-person study led by MD Anderson Cancer Research Center in the United States with the National Institutes of Health. And they looked again at melanoma that had spread, people getting immunotherapy. And they found that they found the second bacteria of responders. It's called Ruminococcus. All right. Now, I encourage your listeners not to stress out about remembering these fancy names. It's kind of like when you go to a museum, go to the dinosaur hall, you're not going to remember the Latin names of all the dinosaurs. You're going to remember, man, that was pretty cool. That big one. Yeah, it's called T-Rex, but you don't need to remember all the Latin names. So Ruminococcus is part of a responder profile for immunotherapy. And what they wanted to find out is what dietary intake was correlated with this healthy bacteria with a good outcome. And it was dietary fiber. And what they found is that those people who ate more dietary fiber had more Ruminococcus and had a better response. So how much fiber? They calculated it. They calculated for every 5 grams of fiber per day, they got a 30% decrease in mortality. 30, okay, on immunotherapy. Now, what's 5 grams of fiber a day? That's how much you get, 5 grams of fiber in an average size pear. That's all you need to eat a day to make this difference. Now, think about that. If you had melanoma and if you were getting immunotherapy, your doctor's probably not telling you yet to actually eat fiber. But this is the nature of breaking research in food as medicine. It's not food versus medicine. I'm not on a hilltop waving a thing of kale saying everybody should forget about their medicines and don't go to your doctor anymore. What I'm saying is that food plus medicine, it is another powerful tool in the toolbox. And people with cancer need to know that.
Yeah, they really do. And you remind me of a story I've heard you share, I think in an interview I saw of yours in the past, where there was a patient who was due to have some immunotherapy and you checked out her stool and found out that she had no Akkermansia muciniphila. So you halted things for 3 weeks. You encouraged these kind of foods. That went up and she responded perfectly. Is that an accurate reflection of that story?
Yeah, that you captured it exactly. And so I think that, as we move into the future, we're going to be putting together this puzzle that, it's almost like we've seen what we need to do for years. We intuitively, we've known that foods can help us get better, that foods and medicine have got to work together. Why do cancer patients ask that question? Because they know inherently there's got to be something there. And so one of the things that I'm really committed to doing, in my career is trying to up the level that doctors actually have to be able to take the latest science and answer those patient questions. Like, patients don't really want to know all the mumbo jumbo, the scientific details. They're not equipped in many cases to really go into that level of detail. But doctors need to be sophisticated enough. If you can understand how an immunotherapy works, which is pretty complicated, then you need to be able to understand how a food works.
Yeah. I mean, I think you've done a wonderful job from what I've seen over the last years of spreading the word about this. Your book, Eat to Beat Diseases, I think it's a wonderful read for anyone, public or doctors, to learn more about what kind of foods can help them. I think there's over 200 foods in there that you've detailed. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. There's over 200 foods. So this whole idea that our body craves diversity. Our health defenses respond to so many different foods. So I basically put together a catalog of more than 200 foods that activate one or more or multiple health defenses. And the wonderful thing, and this is really one of the sort of the take-home messages I want your viewers and listeners to have in here, that the foods that activate our health defenses taste great. Many of them are part of traditional food cultures, Mediterranean cultures, Asian cultures. So you don't have to fear your food anymore for health. We don't have to think about taking away all the foods that we love to eat. We can actually lean into the foods that we love that are healthy for us and start there. And so one of the things that I do, I've always challenged people who go, well, I've never really liked Dr. Lee to eat healthy, so I'm kind of bummed out. I give them a Sharpie and a copy of my book, and I say, go to the tables, and I said, take 5 minutes and leaf through here and circle every food that you like to eat. And I've never met anybody who wouldn't be able to circle 10 foods at least. And then they come back to me, and I'm like, look, you've identified all these circled foods. Activate your health defenses. Start with these, stick with these, and then explore all these other foods that are out there. That's the best way to enrich our lives and our health at the same time.
Yeah, and this knowledge you give people, Dr. Lee, is very empowering, because it could be that person who does that and circles these foods goes, oh, I'm already having like mushrooms and beets. I'm already eating foods. And even that just reframes it in their mind that they're already using food as medicine for their body. You mentioned cancer patients. Of course, they want to know what else they can do, whether it's cancer or anything. Patients want to feel a sense of agency over their health and their life, right? So, no one does well when they think, well, I can't do anything. I just need to leave it up to that treatment or that doctor. We all like to feel that we're sort of playing a role and participating in our health. So I think your work and research and your books and these masterclasses you run on your website, I think are so helpful at giving people that agency. When it comes to cancer, Dr. Lee, there's a lot now about sugar and cancer. And I think this is where there's a bit of complexity around food, because some of these foods, of course, let's say kiwi fruit or, pomegranate juice or the sort of foods you're talking about, of course, some of them can raise our blood sugar. Some of them do contain degrees of sugar. I know they come with lots of other ingredients as well, but how can you help us look at that? What's the relationship between sugar and cancer? And then how does that impact the foods that we consume?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I get asked this a lot. What I try to do is to make people feel comfortable with the idea that our body needs sugar. In fact, the organ in our body that needs the most sugar is our brain. Sugar fuels our metabolism. And the key is that in most people who are able to, your body is able to process a small amount of sugar without any problem whatsoever. And so the sugars that you might encounter in your whole foods, so fruits and vegetables, those are completely fine. Your body should be able to take care of that. It's the sugars that are dangerous for diseases and the sugars that damage your microbiome, that spark inflammation, that can even damage your DNA. That's the concept of added sugar. So it's a can of soda that's got 10 tablespoons of added sugar to it to make it really sweet. No human body can tolerate that over any period of time. And so what I try to say is that, like, it's so easy, so tempting when it comes to something like sugar to go for that all or nothing approach. No, our body needs a little sugar. Your body can actually handle most sugar. When it comes in a fruit or a vegetable, it's just fine. Added sugar, candies, cakes, sodas, okay, those are the ones that easily overwhelm you. So if you're sensitive to sugar, just like you've got diabetes, you got to sort of cut down or cut out those things and be super mindful of making those type of choices. But fruits and vegetables, you have to look at the human data. Okay, don't focus on how much sugar is in a mango. Mango is pretty sweet fruit. Take a look at the human data to show that people who eat mango and other tropical fruits have a much lower incidence of disease X and Y and Z. Look, you can't argue with the science, and you can't argue with the data. Sugar itself, nothing that's natural is by itself inherently evil. And I think that's the thing that I'm trying to get people to think about with sugar. It's a matter of source, it's a matter of quantity, and a matter of degree.
Today, we're going to talk about the amazing benefits of ginger and turmeric for longevity and overall health. I love these two foods, ginger and turmeric, and you can find them in the fresh produce section of a grocery store or a Asian market. You'll definitely find them. Or you can go to the middle aisle of the grocery store and find them ground up and dried as spices. And so don't be afraid to actually wander to the middle aisle and go to the spice section to find ginger and turmeric. So let's talk a little bit about ginger and turmeric individually. First of all,
Hey there, are you ready to use food to improve your health? I do cover a lot in my YouTube videos, but there's only so much time to dive deep into how to use food as medicine. That's why I created my Eat to Beat Disease course. In my course, I walk you through how to use everyday foods that you can find in your grocery store to boost your body's health defenses. This is all based on my research, and everything is rooted in science. And I made it super easy to follow with practical everyday tips. Whether you're trying to prevent disease or just want to optimize your health for longevity, my Eat to Beat Disease course gives you all the tools to make it real and to help you get lasting changes that will help you live longer and live better. To learn more, click the link below or scan the QR code on the screen. I can't wait to get started together in my course. Now, back to the video.
Turmeric actually comes from Southeast Asia. It is a tiny little root, kind of a nub, kind of cigar shape, but tiny smaller. And it's got a little skin on it. And if you peel off the skin or if you break it in half, you'll see that it's bright orange on the inside. Now, this is an edible root that can be used for cooking and stewing. You often see this in Southeast Asian cuisine. You can also find it in Indian cuisine as well. Turmeric's actually been used for traditional healing, Ayurvedic healing, traditional medicines for thousands of years. I like to think about it as a colorful spice that you can actually use for cooking as well. And what's in turmeric is something called curcumin. Now, curcumin is a bioactive that does a lot of really powerful things. Curcumin lowers inflammation in your body. It's sort of the OG, one of the original anti-inflammatory substances. All right, that's what curcumin does, anti-inflammatory. Curcumin also can cut off the blood supply, feeding cancer. So it's anti-angiogenic. This is something that I did work on years ago and to help discover that activity. Curcumin also is antioxidant, so it actually protects your DNA. Look, we all have DNA in our body. It's our genetic instructions. They make proteins. You don't want them to be damaged because when your DNA is damaged, it's called a mutation. What does mutation set you up for? Cancer. So protecting your DNA with an antioxidant property of curcumin found in turmeric is actually another benefit. The other thing that turmeric actually does is it slows down cellular aging. Now, this is different than actually reversing aging, like you don't turn into a baby when you have it, but it actually gets your cells chilled out a little bit so you're not as, your cells are not speeding up and going towards a more aged state. All right, so it slows down cellular aging. And in fact, it can actually help to slow down the burning down of your telomeres. These are actually the kind of like the fuses at the end of your DNA that burn down as we age. It slows that whole process down. So that's turmeric. All right. Now, what about ginger? Another root, really amazing root. I love ginger that you can actually find in the fresh market of the grocery store. You can find it dried in the spice market. If you go to an Asian grocery store, you'll actually see beautiful, big chunks of ginger. They're sort of like almost like a cactus, a big centerpiece with lots of little arms sticking out. And ginger is something that's used in Asian cooking of all sorts. If you've actually been to the sushi bar, you know that ginger is sliced really thin and given as a pile next to your sushi. Absolutely delicious. Ginger also is used to flavor stir fries in Chinese cooking. Ginger is used in Thai food, Vietnamese food, used in soups. Just a beautiful, really delicate but potent type of flavor. Now, what's in ginger? Ginger has a bioactive called Gingerol. Now, Gingerol has been studied. It's anti-inflammatory. It is antioxidant. It also cuts off the blood supply to tumors. This is something I worked on as well. And Gingerol also can actually improve metabolism and help to lower lipids as well. And I want to give you a little pro tip on ginger because when I used to buy ginger, I used to take it back, you stick it on a cutting board, and you got to take a knife, hopefully a small knife, and just kind of like scrape off and trim off that thin skin layer. It took a while, all right? And the skin was, you don't want to cut too deeply into the ginger. But I actually found a tip that I'm sharing with you now. If you want to really peel ginger like a pro, here's what you do. Take a tablespoon, just one out of your spoon drawer, your silverware drawer, all right? And what you do is you hold the spoon in one hand with the curved side facing the ginger. And you hold that ginger and you just scrape it with the spoon. Scrape. Your spoon will take off that skin just at the skin level. And before, it just takes like a few seconds, you've actually skinned the entire ginger without wasting it. Super easy, and it's a great pro tip for using ginger. All right, now let's talk about the benefit of turmeric and ginger together when it comes to longevity and overall health. One of the things that this combination of turmeric and ginger that I think would be really good for is joint health. Now, obviously, as we get older, our joints suffer from wear and tear. You get inflammation, you get pain, osteoarthritis. And it turns out that ginger and turmeric, when you combine their anti-inflammatory properties together, can actually be a balm for inflammation in your body. And what better tissue to actually aim at is to actually lower inflammation in your joints. Sure, you can take a pill, a non-steroidal, but actually taking turmeric and ginger, adding it to your food is a wonderful way to get some of this, all their bioactives in to be able to help that vulnerability of aging, which is really joint pain and joint compromise. Okay, the other thing that I think that turmeric and ginger are great for, think about it, brain health. Now, when we actually are aging, one of the things that we really want to avoid is dulling of the brain, cognitive deficits. Where's my keys? Now I can't remember. What did you just say? What's my name? You want to avoid that. So it turns out that it's thought that inflammation plays a role. Brain inflammation plays a role. So both turmeric and ginger have these wonderful properties that can actually be anti-inflammatory in nature. The other thing that occurs, we think, is that oxidative stress in the brain damages neurons, the nerves in your brain. And so the antioxidant properties of both ginger and turmeric are really, really great to be able to help as part of an overall lifestyle plan to be able to calm down your inflammation and oxidative stress in your brain as we age. So for better cognitive health. All right. The other thing is turmeric and ginger good for is cardiovascular health. All right. Now, again, inflammation within your blood vessels, your arteries, that's a setup for atherosclerosis, which is building up of crap on the lining. Okay, this is sort of lipids and other inflammatory proteins. It forms a crust on inside your blood vessels. When you hear about somebody having a heart attack with blockages, that's really because the crust is actually formed, the gunk is formed inside your blood vessel because of damaged blood vessels to that inner lining, the endothelial lining of your blood vessels. So anything that's anti-inflammatory actually can help counter those effects of that can cause cardiovascular disease. That's the accumulation of gunk material, lipids that caused by inflammation that can actually cause blockages, narrowing and blockages, whether it's in the heart, which sets you up for a heart attack, in the brain, sets you up for vascular dementia, as well as stroke in your neck, the carotid arteries, and in your legs, it can cause peripheral arterial disease. Now, this is actually a silent kind of heart disease, except it's not in your heart, it's in your legs. And the gunk accumulates to the point where you actually can't even walk 100 feet before, your blood vessels are very narrow, so the muscles of your leg aren't getting enough oxygen, so you seize up and cramp. And this is actually, when this actually happens, you could be walking down the parking lot just 100 feet, and then you got to stop and rest. All right, you need to your muscles need to completely stop their work so they can actually load up again, get rid of the lactic acid, and get more oxygen. Or walking in a shopping center or a shopping mall, you just walk a few stores length and now you cramp up. That is actually peripheral arterial disease. So ginger and turmeric, with their anti-inflammatory effects, help to protect blood vessels. But the gingerol of ginger and the curcumin of turmeric also directly groom the health of the lining of the blood vessels, the endothelial cells, that inner lining. Okay, and so they also directly help vascular health, the health of your blood vessels. You get better blood flow. Better blood flow, better heart function. Better blood flow, better brain function. And by the way, this also applies to your legs, applies to all your organs. It applies also to erectile function as well. You want good blood flow in every part of your body. So when it comes to brain health, cardiovascular health, when it comes to joint health, turmeric and ginger are really, really useful foods to be used as part of the tool in the toolbox, the food as medicine. But every bit as importantly, I want to let you know that ginger and turmeric are great foods to cook with, whether they're dried form or whether they're fresh form. And look, if you don't know how to use these ingredients, it's so simple. Type in ginger and turmeric, go on to Google, hit search, recipe, hit search, punch up video, and watch somebody teach you some of the recipes that they love to make to create a tasty dish you created using the healthy ingredients of turmeric and ginger.
There is a new type of medicine that's not chemo that they're called anti-angiogenesis. So they cut off the blood supply feeding the big cancers. So here's a research experiment that was done a couple of decades ago in the lab that I worked in. If you grew tiny little cancer cells and up to the size of the tip of a ballpoint pen, that's about 3 millimeters in diameter, and you kind of floated them in a broth and didn't allow them to touch blood vessels, they would just stay there at that size almost indefinitely. Okay. And in our body, that's the size that the immune system would wing by and take out. The moment you allow blood vessels to grow into that microscopic mass, that tumor will grow 16,000 times in 2 weeks. It'll explode. This is like a trigger that's get pulled in order to have cancers grow up. And for that reason, biotech companies started to develop anti-angiogenic drugs to treat cancer by cutting off the blood supply. So there are about a dozen anti-angiogenic drugs that have changed the game for treating kidney cancer and liver cancer and lung cancer and even brain cancer. All right. So we know that we can actually do this with drugs. The question is, can we do it with food? Not so much when cancer is out of the barn, horses out of the barn, but what about prevention? What are foods that can prevent cancer? Well, it turns out that 2 apples a day actually can lower the rate of lung cancer and colon cancer. Why? Because there are natural substances in apples like quercetin. That's one of the natural chemicals that actually are naturally anti-angiogenic. Green tea actually has been lowered risk of colorectal cancer. Okay. Particularly in women. And what's in a cup of green tea are these polyphenols, e.g. CG. And when you drink it, it gets in your bloodstream. Why? Because the blood vessels are carrying it. And now your blood vessels loaded with this cancer-starving stuff. These little tumors don't have a chance.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Is it the same as eating 2 apples a day and eating these specific foods as it would be just putting all those ingredients in a supplement and taking the supplement? Would that work just as well? To have like the super supplement that is just the killer of all cancer and diseases, of all these different nutrients?
Well, look, I'm a researcher, and I've been involved with drug development. And so if it were that easy, it would have been done a while ago. Right. But I can tell you that what I tell people is that the whole food is always going to be a little bit better for the following reason. Number one, for a supplement, you reduce it to a couple of different elements, that you try to pack into a capsule. The whole food, man, it's got hundreds, if not thousands of natural goodies and chemicals, including like an apple's got the skin. It's got ursolic acid. It's got fiber, which feeds your gut microbiome. It's got quercetin, which cuts out the blood supply. So you're getting all that in there, compared to just one thing you try to pack into a little capsule. That said, supplements are useful, and I'm involved with designing and developing supplements as well. What we want to do, supplements, the term means topping off, right? So you're supplementing, you're not replacing. And this is what, like what you were just asking, Lewis, is so important. Like, can we just not bother eating and just have a supplement? No, man, like you should be eating because you enjoy food. It's good for us. It brings people together. It tells us something about our traditions, our culture, our family, our community. Everybody's from someplace. Everybody's got something that they love to eat. And of that list, there's some good stuff in it. And so we should really lean forward. So that's the other thing that's a little bit different from me, that compared to a lot of other doctors that tell people what not to eat. I try to tell people what you should add to your life, not that what you should take away. Plenty of people can tell you what to take away. Right. I'm telling you what to add, and we should add foods that activate your health defenses, and supplements can be useful to top things off.
Got it. I've been told many times that inflammation is also a big, I guess, warning sign for diseases and cancers. And the more inflammation, the more your body is less capable of defending itself, and its immune system is weaker, is what I've been told. What would you say are the best ways to reduce inflammation in the body quickly? Is it through food? Is it through medicine? Is it through fasting? Is it through, less, more sleep? Is it through a better environment? What would you say is the
So, a lot of people, I think, when they hear about inflammation, they think about it as a bad guy. And what I want to tell you is that inflammation is normal, and it's just part of our immune system. So when you actually have a bacteria or a virus invading your body, let's say you get a cold, your immune system sets up a little bit of inflammation in your nose, okay, which is why we have a stuffy nose, a runny nose, and then it tackles the invader right then and there, and then hopefully that's all that matters. And by the way, another sure sign of inflammation is if you cut yourself in the kitchen, and you see that little cut will pretty quickly swell up, turn red and swell up. Inflammation, that's your immune system trying to tackle all the bacteria that might be trying to get into your skin. Inflammation is good, but it goes up to protect you, and then it comes right down. I call it like the volume switch in a car radio. Like you get in a car, you want to hear some tunes, you got to turn it on. But what the problem with inflammation is when it doesn't go back down, it keeps on going more. It's chronic, and it keeps on going up. And that's like getting in your car and having a passenger, turn up that volume and keep cranking that volume. And you're like, hey man, turn that thing down, right? Doesn't go down, and you just can't go on.
Right.
And that's what happens inside your body. So what are some of the different ways to actually deal with that? Well, the first thing to do is think about lifestyle, because we can actually give anti-inflammatories. I could tell you to go out to take some Motrin, Tylenol, whatever. That'll take down your inflammation. But actually, there are ways of actually doing it. If you actually just, if you stopped and just calmed yourself and did some breaths and start to meditate, your body's inflammation will start to calm down. Okay. If you actually got a good night's sleep, your body will the inflammation will start to calm down. It's kind of like, everything is going crazy. Just let the thing settle a little bit. So that's your inflammation settling down. Now, there are foods that have a lot of anti-inflammatory properties that can be very helpful. So for example, cranberries have a lot of anti-inflammatory polyphenols. Chocolate even also has anti-inflammatory properties. Vitamin C is pretty anti-inflammatory. Strawberries, guava, red bell peppers, all really good, really good. I think that the other thing to think about is lots of fruits and vegetables, lots of fruits in particular, have anti-inflammatory properties. So the key about inflammation is that you don't want to get rid of it altogether. Okay. Like if you got pumped up on steroids, it would shut down your inflammation. You might get infected. because you don't have any inflammation. You want your body to get its set point. You want to get back to balance. So I think that, there's lifestyle, there's diet. Hey, I want to share another resource with you. It's my free guide on boosting your metabolism. I'll let you in on something that most health and wellness experts don't talk about. And that's that you can actually enjoy your food while eating to improve your metabolism. And if this sounds like a paradox, I explain in this guide how science is teaching us that it's true. In my guide, I share 5 foods that activate your body's beneficial brown fat and tell you how it works to burn down the harmful body fat you want to lose. The best part? Healing your metabolism can taste great. Check out my guide on boosting your metabolism, available right now. It's free, in the caption below. Now, back to the video. Foods you can choose, there's sleep. All these things can actually help to calm inflammation. It's not a single on and off switch.
I'm curious, what would you say are the most harmful foods then? If you said here are 3 foods that we should be eliminating, what would be those most harmful foods that cause the spike in inflammation consistently and causes a lot of these other diseases and cancerous cells to occur?
Right. Well, I'll tell you 3 foods that actually harm the body's health defenses, and including the immune system by ratcheting it up inflammation and then lowering the defensive properties, but also harm your DNA, also harm your microbiome, also blunt and stun your stem cells, and also wreck your body's ability to control its blood supply. So it's a lot worse than simply triggering inflammation. And by the way, that's the whole point, right? Like, we try to take the silver bullet approach to everything. Let's match this with match that. What I'm telling you is that the body is this system.
Yes.
So either you introduce something good to it, and you'll probably light up a lot of good systems. And if you put something bad to it, you'll probably trash a lot of it, right? Okay. So what are some 3 foods that actually we know can trash your body's health defenses? One is soda. So sugar sweetened beverages like soda. All right. So, the favorite ones. It's tough, right? Because
I wish I could go back to my younger self and say, put down the 8 cans of Dr. Pepper a day, when you're like 8 years old. Man.
Well, and I'm telling you, like, this is one thing that I always try to coach people on. If you really, really love sodas, okay, try to come off it, just by going down 1 can a day, because most people drink multiple cans. Go down 1 can a day and get to as low as you can, because the added sugar actually overloads your body, your body's ability to be able to handle the sugar. And then it makes you inflamed just by the nature of the sugar. Eventually,
I cut out soda years ago. I mean, maybe I have it once in a couple months or something for like a treat, but it used to be almost an addiction probably for how much I drank it growing up as a kid. In the summers, you're just drinking it nonstop, like water. But then when I learned about nutrition more, when I was playing sports and realizing this is making me tired, it's not quenching my thirst, that's when I said, oh, okay, I need more of a competitive edge, and kind of cut it out of my life. So
well, not only does soda, actually, the sugar in soda, cause inflammation, it really wrecks your microbiome, your gut bacteria as well. Your gut bacteria just can't tolerate that much sugar. Yeah. Okay. And then guess what? And then, you say, well, wait a minute. That's why we have diet soda, right? Turns out that those artificial sweeteners in soda screw your microbiome, your gut bacteria, even more.
Ooh, more than regular can of soda.
More than a regular can of
soda. Come on. So if it says 0 sugar and it's a soda or a pop, you're saying that could be more harmful than
for your gut microbiome.
Gotcha.
Right? Because the 0 sugar is actually to prevent glucose spikes in your body. But in point of fact, it actually wrecks your gut microbiome. And remember what I told you, that gut microbiome communicates your brain, communicates your immune system, communicates your healing systems. That is not a system you want to screw with. And so that's why, I try to tell people, you really got to watch out for those artificial sweeteners. They do some bad things. So that's one thing. So
what are the best, before we go to the next thing, what are the best sweeteners we should be looking for when we're adding something into food, or we see it on the packaging?
Sure. Well, natural sugars in fruits and vegetables, people go, well, I don't want any sugar in them, but what about in a peach? There's nothing better than a summer peach to me. And that natural sugar is okay, because when you eat the peach, you're not just getting the sugar, you're also getting all these other bioactives and the fiber and everything
Fibers,
else,
yeah.
hundreds of thousands of natural chemicals that are good for you from Mother Nature's kind of pharmacy with an F.
Yes.
Okay. So that's different than just, having sugar in a glass.
Yeah.
Or corn syrup, right. High fructose corn syrup, not good for you. Maple syrup, a good way to sweeten.
Okay.
Honey is also a good way to sweeten as well. Monk fruit is actually a really, really sweet tasting gourd. That's a shell that is also a decent sweetener. Stevia, actually pretty powerful sweetener. I've been doing some research on it. I haven't been able to find anything wrong with it. But for people that are looking at stevia, be very careful. Pick up that package and look at the side of the box and read what's on there, because a lot of things that are called stevia actually have a lot of other things added to it.
Okay.
So you want to get the pure stuff. I always tell, if it's in a box, look at what's inside it before you buy it.
With this process happening, with them just pulling in more and more fuel and growing in size, are there foods that can actually restrict these fat cells from growing / cut off their nutrient supply so they won't continue to get as big?
Yeah, before we talk about fuels, let me just foods, let me just say that actually our body has its own kind of like regulatory switch. So here's the thing. We talked about insulin that rises in the body as a response to eating. Basically, food's coming in, energy's coming in, your body senses it, it makes this hormone, insulin, and insulin actually helps to draw that energy into regular cells as well as store it into fat. Now, here's something really important about normal healthy fat. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit more about normal healthy, because understanding the normal allows us to understand the abnormal. If you just jump to kind of like the demon, all right, then you miss the good guy part of it, right? This is just like, kind of like it's not black and white. There's a transition where fat is good until there's too much of it, and then it actually becomes harmful. And what we want to do is respect our fat and tame it, not vilify it, and not try to cut it out, suck it out, and poison it. So normal fat, I mentioned, is an organ, and that organ is an endocrine organ. It's actually like a thyroid, like a pancreas, like an adrenal gland. And this is quite amazing to think about fat as an actual organ. And it releases about 13 different hormones. All right, hormones are just proteins that are made and released by an organ, go into the bloodstream, and they go elsewhere in the body to help to control different kinds of functions. So one of the things that fat does as an organ, it releases leptin. Leptin is sort of an appetite regulator. Turns up and turns down your appetite depending on the number, about the volume. So it controls your behavior, okay? And the reason I'm mentioning this is that, you know what? When the leptin is high and it turns down your appetite, you don't want to eat so much. Guess what? Less fuel. Less need to keep storing that stuff in. Number one. Number two, it produces a super powerful hormone called adiponectin. Now, many people may not know this term, adiponectin, but if I were to draw your blood, Sean, take it to a lab, ordinary hospital lab, and measure all the hormones in your body, your adiponectin levels, and mine, by the way, would be 1,000 times higher than any other hormone in your body. Higher than your thyroid, higher than your testosterone, higher than any other organ. And the reason is adiponectin is what allows insulin to pull that energy in to your cells. It's another hormone made by fat, by good, healthy fat. We need that fat to get our energy, our basic energy. All right. Now, there's one more hormone I want to talk about. It's called resistin, made by fat. And resistin basically is the brake to the gas pedal of adiponectin. So if adiponectin at 1,000 times higher than any other hormone in your body helps insulin pull fuel into your body, into your cells. Resistin is the brake to basically say, oh, whoa, let's slow down a little bit. Normal balance, right? So the life is all about balance. Adiponectin, resistin, leptin. These are just three of the hormones in normal, healthy fat. Here's the thing. When you've got too much fuel, that needs to be packed up, and those fat cells get hundreds of times bigger, and then they replicate, and stem cells make more and more fat, and they get bigger, and they get hypoxic in the middle, and they start dying because they can't get enough blood supply. What happens is that inflammation actually derails your normal fat's ability to produce these hormones. Leptin gets screwed up. Now you don't know if you're hungry or not. You can keep on eating. It's worse. Okay. Now you can keep on loading more fuel. Your adiponectin gets screwed up. So now, even though you're eating and you've got all this energy, now your body can't pull it into the cells. Doesn't even store it very well. And then the resistant goes haywire. So basically, it doesn't know that you should slow it down or speed it up. And so basically, it's kind of like as excess fat grows, it's basically like creating chaos and air traffic control. Nobody knows where to land the planes. And so this causes even more chaos. So the important thing is, how do we actually tame that excess fat? And so the body can do some of it by itself. Like our body is hardwired to know how to tame fat to some extent. Not if it goes too crazy. But secondly, and this is sort of like the surprise, is that there are certain foods that can do it as well. But how your body does it is actually incredibly important, because when we're not eating, okay, fasting, when we're not eating, like when we're sleeping, all right, insulin goes down, and our body basically says, oh, when the insulin's down, we can burn fuel. When insulin's up, can't burn the fuel, can't tap into those fat cells, the fuel cells. When insulin's down, like when we're sleeping, it goes, all right, not eating. We need to draw into our fuel cells. Let's pull some energy out. And it starts to actually burn extra fuel by burning extra fat. So when we're sleeping, our body's hardwired, as our metabolism is hardwired to start burning down extra fuel. And this is really kind of the basis of thinking about intermittent fasting, timed eating. The longer we give our body's natural metabolism, our hardwiring to burn that fuel, the better it is. Now, it turns out that certain foods, and this is the big surprise that I write about in Eat to Beat Your Diet, certain foods can amplify that effect, not just when you're sleeping, but even when you're eating. So it's an override. You can actually use food to override that system. So even though your body's not supposed to be burning that energy, it goes, let's go ahead and burn some energy anyway.
It's fascinating. Fascinating. One of the things that I love about your work and your book is that you're reframing food as well, because a lot of times we see food as an enemy, and you're saying food is not the enemy. It's actually the solution. Food is a big contributor to so many of our problems. If we're talking about obesity, if we're talking about excess fat gain, and it's also the solution, right? And so choosing intelligent foods, because that's the thing, these foods, it's not just food, it's information. And there's an intelligence underlying all of this stuff and how it's influencing our metabolism. So at this point, let's get into, and circling back to my initial question, when talking about the growth of our fat cells and angiogenesis, the creation of those new blood vessels, let's talk about first, in this fat loss equation, what are some foods that have anti-angiogenesis properties that can help to cut off that nutrient supply to fat cells?
Well, this actually goes all the way back to my research in the late 1980s. I was super interested in finding ways to fight cancer by cutting off the blood supply. So I worked in a lab, and we were looking at before pharmaceuticals were developed, biopharmaceuticals were developed for this area. We were looking for natural sources, and we're looking for anything in nature that could give us a clue of how nature might provide a natural chemical that could cut off the blood supply to cancers. Now, we knew actually, even back then, like licorice could do it. Stuff in licorice could actually cut off the blood supply to tumors, feeding extra cells that you don't want to be growing.
You're not talking about Twizzlers.
What's that?
You're not talking about Twizzlers, are you?
We're not talking about Twizzlers. So I'm not talking about Twizzlers. I'm actually talking about licorice. And it turns out that there's a natural chemical found in licorice called isoliquitrin. All right. Now, as a researcher, one of the things that we're able to do is know something's in a natural compound, take it out, and test it in the lab. We tested isoliquitrin on blood vessels that are grown to feed harmful cells like tumors, like tumor blood vessels. And it actually powerfully stopped those extra blood vessels. But the thing that really brought it home for me, and I've never forgotten this, is a research study that was done by a Greek researcher working in Switzerland. His name was Ted Fosis, and he looked at the urine of villagers outside of Kyoto, Japan. These villagers were all vegetarians. They ate mostly soy, okay? And he had frozen jars of this urine. And his boss, his supervisor, said, go find something interesting to do with the urine or toss it out. So he went to look for hormones inside the urine, thinking that he was an endocrinologist. So he was interested in looking at hormones. When he ran the urine underneath this thing called a mass spectrometry, okay, you see these spikes. And he found a spike that didn't belong in the human. And it only came from the soybean. And it was a spike of genistein. So he cut out that spike, which we can do in the lab, and he tested it on blood vessels that would be feeding cancer. It immediately stopped those blood vessels from growing. And so this was to discover that genistein found in plant-based foods like soybeans could actually be anti-angiogenic, and they could cut off the blood supply feeding cancers. It really was a mind-blowing discovery. And I read this, and I know Ted Fosis, we had this conversation about it, and it was absolutely amazing to think about what other secrets might be in food that could help to control the blood vessels. Now remember, earlier we talked about the fact that growing fat needs extra blood vessels, right? So it's trying to grow those blood vessels. If you deliberately cut off the blood vessels that are feeding fat, all right, it'll actually shrink the tube. It'll shrink tumors, and it'll also shrink fat. So although the tumor wants to grow more blood vessels, and it can't, so it starts to die in the middle. If you then step in and do an intervention to really cut off the blood vessels, that fat mass will shrink. And this has been shown very conclusively in the lab that this can actually happen. Green tea, the catechins, EGCG, powerful anti-angiogenic, can cut off the blood supply feeding tumors, can cut off the blood supply feeding fat as well. So one of the reasons I really came up to this whole idea of body fat is not only my background in this research, thinking about, well, maybe fat growing the way that we talked about, cloning itself, getting bigger and bigger and bigger, hypoxic in the middle. That, to me, resembles a tumor exactly. And so the question is, could we tame the tumor by taming the blood supply? And I remember the work that was done earlier, and it turns out that many of the foods that I wrote about in my first book that are anti-angiogenic, my first book being Eat to Beat Disease, more than 300 foods, there's a whole chapter on anti-angiogenic cancer-starving foods, or blood vessel taming foods. And I started to realize here was this whole opportunity to look at ways of taming our body fat as well. And the epidemiological study supports it.
Wow.
What are the top things that you would say that people are doing every day that actually create those potholes when it comes to our vascular health? I know you like to focus on what we can add, but I'd also like to talk about what's causing the most damage when it comes to our vascular health and our overall blood flow throughout the body.
Yeah, okay. So that's really an important thing to think about. Like, I spend most of my time developing positive messages that people can lean into. But if you want to start from a level playing field, you got to think about, all right, how do you unload and unburden your body's health defenses so you're not working against yourself? That's kind of like what we're talking about. What are the things that people commonly do that work against your health defenses? So you're sitting down and suppressing your defenses. Well, let's walk through a couple of them. Number one is physical inactivity, right? Like, I mean, think about during the pandemic, a lot of people were just not doing as much, not outdoors as much, not exercising as much, not socializing as much, not traveling as much. And, and there's a lot of depression too. And so physical activity, even 30 minutes of moderate physical activity, get your heart rate up, walk out, like everybody feels a little bit better after taking a walk, no matter how stressed out you are. And even if you're not stressed out, you feel better. It gets your circulation going. Exercise like that lowers inflammation. Being physically inactive, the couch potato, actually is incredibly being a couch potato is incredibly damaging. By the way, I heard like when you walk, you rev up your metabolism as well. I saw the study that I was just looking at for the next book I'm writing that's really amazing. It turns out if you are going to be a couch potato, that sitting down a lot, there was a research study done on this, even fidgeting, the knee going bump, 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 or, fidget with like one of those fidget toys, even that starts to burn calories compared to just not moving at all, like just sitting there and staring at a screen. And so again, movement, physical activity, really important actually to kind of rev up your metabolism, get back to better health, and unleash your health defenses. Another thing is really eating a lot of ultra processed foods. All of us who go to the grocery store are tempted to go into the middle aisle. It's almost like a siren calls you into the middle aisle to look at all the colorful packaged ultra processed things, calls you. It's like the siren that calls the ship captain to wind up on the rocks and then sink the ship. Well, this is the middle aisle of the grocery store. Now, there's a lot of good stuff there too as well, but I think most of us go for the things that have been advertised to us since we were a kid to go look for those sweets and things in the middle aisle. Well, it turns out that if you take the time to go around the perimeter first and go to the produce section, and that's where you should spend most of your time when you're grocery shopping, looking for what's fresh and plant-based, and it really kind of rev up your dietary fiber and your bioactives. That's what's really good. But the middle aisle, it's hard to stay out of. And so when people eat boxed foods, jarred foods, canned foods that are laced with chemical preservatives and processed, made up using factory processes that take whole food and turn them into this weird machined food, extruded food, food that your grandmother or great-grandmother would not recognize as food. And then you add these synthetic chemicals to it. Man, does that actually work against your body's health defenses.
Wow. And, there's been so much conversation these days about being mindful. This goes into the category of ultra processed foods, but being mindful about the overall sort of load of sugar and highly refined carbohydrates. We've done multiple episodes about continuous glucose monitors and just being more aware about the order of food. So maybe you go to a restaurant and instead of having the bread and the butter, which everybody likes to do here and there, especially if it's a nice piece of sourdough, or we're lucky here in Los Angeles, there's a few places that will import in wheat from Italy. You were talking about Italy and the quality of ingredients there. So instead of having those at the beginning of your dinner when you sit down at the restaurant, maybe saving that piece of bread for the end after you have some fiber, some healthy fats and protein inside of there. How important is sequencing to you? And do you think of it in the context of the advice that you give folks when you're talking about food as medicine?
Very important. Sequencing, first of all, I believe that we should eat food not only for our health, but to bring us joy. Okay. And so there's nothing wrong with eating foods that you really enjoy that are also healthy for you. And I think that's really the alignment we're going to have. And when you have a spread of food in front of you, whether it's at a restaurant and you get your bread and butter, and then you get your salad, then you get your main, then you get your dessert. Okay. There's kind of like a ritual order that it goes in, but nobody said that you have to eat it in the order that it's actually served to you. What I think when it comes to food is that you should eat the healthiest things first and save other bits really on the side. Take a little nibble of them. The problem, that you talk about with bread, okay, even good quality bread like, homemade sourdough bread with stuff from Italy. The problem with that is that if you sit down when you're really hungry and that's the first thing that you're served, you're going to eat a lot of it. I try to tell people, don't waste your appetite. You're going to have a certain amount of appetite. You don't want to load up on the stuff that's not necessarily high quality calories and bioactives. What I do when I actually sit at a restaurant, I don't eat the bread right away. I look at the menu. I look at the whole menu. And what I try to do is to recognize ingredients that are healthy and then see if they are actually listed in offerings that I really am drawn towards, attracted towards. Something with capers. I know capers have a lot of chlorogenic acid too, or quercetin. Wow, look at that. That's an interesting salad. I've never had that before. Let me try that. And I size up the whole meal. And then I will order, but I'm not eating the bread first before I even look at that. And I'm like, I'm kind of full up. I'm just going to eat I'm just going to get like the family style pasta for myself. Now you got bread, now you got pasta. Now you've kind of like just distorted your whole kind of thing. So what I say is that look on the menu for the things that are good for you. By the way, sometimes you can order, sometimes there's really good stuff that's ordered in smaller plates, and you can just order 2 of those or even 3 of those without ordering an entree, you know? And so there's no rhyme or reason. You know, I don't want to say that you should eat dessert first and your main last. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is that spend the quality of your time eating the things that are tasty and good for you.
On the topic of things that are good for you, I love your Instagram. And by the way, everybody who's listening, if you want more of this information, little preview, Dr. William Li has so many great resources that are out there. This is an incredible free webinar that your team is doing on a regular basis. We'll link to it inside of the show notes, as well as your Instagram is another great resource because you'll always make me excited about an ingredient or food that I thought I knew about, but then maybe I forgot to include on a regular basis. And this is one of those foods that was in your Grand Slam, sorry, a little tongue twister, Grand Slam PDF. Again, we have the link to where to download that inside of the show notes. And also I saw you do an Instagram TV or an Instagram live video on this recently, and that's sunflower seeds. So why should we be excited about sunflower seeds? If you can remember some of the key highlights and talking points that you shared about why you like to include this ingredient in your diet on a regular basis.
Well, one of the things that I love about sunflower seeds is they taste really good. They're nutty. They have this kind of really delicate kind of flavor. And they're not very crunchy. They're kind of soft. And they're very commonly eaten in the Mediterranean, lightly roasted. And so it's a great treat. It's a good source of dietary fiber. And there's also a bioactive in it called SDG. I'm not going to even bother going into the chemical name, pronounce what the S and the D and the G stands for. But I can tell you that actually it protects your stem cells. And yes, sunflower seeds do belong to the Grand Slammers, but I will also tell you that the fact that there's dietary fiber to feed your gut microbiome, which helps your metabolism, helps you heal better, makes you feel better, and actually activates your brain and improves your mood, sunflower seeds are a great way of snacking. And the protection for your stem cells also means that it helps your body renew itself from the inside out. Now, sunflower seeds are something I like to keep around, like just a little bowlful, like if I'm for a snack. That's the other thing I like about it. You don't have to eat up like a couple of fistfuls of the stuff for it to be good for you. You can just kind of like chew on them a little bit by bit, and you feel totally satisfied. And it's a great source of fiber and other bioactives.
Does it matter if we eat them raw or not, or roasted? Should we be worried about how much sodium might come if they are roasted? Just any kind of considerations. And I guess people could think about this when they're thinking about all sort of seeds and nuts that they want to include in their diet. So we'd love to hear your take on it.
Such an important thing. So, like what I do is I like to buy just a bag of sunflower seeds or cashews or walnuts that isn't actually pre-seasoned. I like to do it myself, honestly, or sometimes like sunflower seeds, I don't mind them if they're not seasoned at all. I kind of like the fact that they're actually even a little sweet, and they're not cloyingly sweet, but they're definitely not salty. You can salt them if you want, but be very careful about commercial brand seasoned nuts and seeds, because oftentimes they are loaded with salt. Also, sometimes they're loaded with unhealthy oils because to roast them, they'll coat them with really unhealthy saturated fats, and then they roast them and they'll dump salt on them and they'll shake all the salt off. And that'll be a pretty tasty bag. That I guarantee you. Like, it'll be kind of addictive to go through them, but man, your sodium will go through the roof. And then if you get the barbecued flavors and then the pizza flavored and all those other kinds of things that might sound attractive on the label, just remember, mostly those are seasonings, that some of which are synthetic and are engineered to taste like something with artificial, something synthetic. Like, that's not what you want. And so I like to go for the elemental, natural flavors. If I'm going to season it, like cashews, I might season myself a little bit. Walnuts, I don't need seasoning. Pecans or almonds, I don't really need seasoning. But if you're going to use seasoning, just take a little pinch of sea salt, okay? And you can just sprinkle it on it, mix it around. You'll get a little bit of salt, but you do not want to actually, this is not shaker style. You definitely don't want to do that.
Yeah, the interesting thing about it is that the level of sodium that comes in these highly processed snacks that are already prepared for us. I was even using a spice yesterday that is from a very healthy company and known as a healthy company. The spice was organic. It's a pre-seasoning. And I was looking at the bag, and the bag, which had the spice inside of it that I was using for these chicken thighs that I was making to add to my base salad, my big fat salad, had avocado oil, had olive oil, some avocados, olives, a bunch of really just good and healthy things, including fermented beets. That's usually my sort of chosen way of having beets in my diet, and other great vegetables. Anyways, I was looking at the bag on the back, and the amount of sodium that was in there was essentially almost 30% of the recommended daily value for one serving of that seasoning that's there. Now, the crazy thing is, I was doing the math online about what it would take for me at my house to use salt, right? High quality table salt or Himalayan salt or sea salt to get close to that amount. And what most of us forget is that if we wanted to salt our food at the level that it comes pre-seasoned by processed food companies, some which are still in that quote unquote healthy category, it actually wouldn't taste that good if we used salt ourselves to do that equivalent amount of sodium. You have to engineer it and do all sorts of things to make that amount of salt palatable. So I think for the most part, if people are just using a reasonable amount of sea salt at home, just to dust their meal or add a little bit to their roast veggies, you're going to be fine overall. It's actually very hard to get to levels of sodium that are coming in these processed foods that we pick up in the store. So I think the moral of the story, and feel free to disagree or agree, is just overall cutting down the amount of processed foods that we include in our diet, even being very wary of a lot of the healthy processed foods that are now being sold at Whole Foods and other places, because that's really where you get these large quantities of sodium from.
Yeah, I mean, it's always buyer beware. And the one sort of cheat that every commercial food provider, restaurants included, to make their food taste better is salt, because salt does make almost everything taste better, just like sugar makes everything taste better. A little bit's okay. The quantities that are often used are not okay. And I think that that's important to remember too. Along those same lines, your listeners should actually think about this. When you go to a restaurant, if you were to actually go behind the scenes and see how the chefs are actually salting the food, you'd be surprised. They will grab like a big mound of salt and just throw it into a dish sometimes, and it'll taste really great, but you've got way more sodium in there than you ever thought. When I cook at home, I'll tell you, although I will be very cautious not to use too much salt, here's a little trick that people who cook at home can use. So if you're going to saute something in a pan, okay, I usually cook with olive oil over medium heat, not super high heat. I don't want to burn the stuff in the olive oil. And I wanted to put a little salt, just a little bit of salt. What I don't do is cook the food and then take the salt and throw it into the food after it's done. I will actually sometimes just take a pinch of salt and dust the olive oil while it's heating up. Now you're guaranteed not to actually put too much salt in it, because you can see exactly how much salt you're putting in. If you were to put like a spoonful of salt in there, you're like, man, I just ruined the whole pan. I can't use that pan. I got to clean it out and start it all over again. So I think, even if you're cooking at home, just having that awareness that, whether it's at home or a restaurant or at a ultra processed factory, somebody is putting salt in there, and it's up to you to determine how much you're going to allow into your body.
Your TED Talk, which of course has been viewed by millions of people now, there was a really interesting slide towards the end where I very much resonate with this idea. What's the root cause of multiple diseases? Can we, address the root cause, and then we're automatically going to take care of multiple different downstream consequences? And that was a very powerful slide showing that when angiogenesis is working well, or when it's not working well, what can happen in the body. Could you just talk us through that lens, angiogenesis? Because I think that's really interesting. And then you also mentioned cancer. and blood supply. And again, could you just talk to us about cancer and how it can only grow to a certain size unless it gets its own blood supply as well, please?
Yeah, sure. Our circulation is these blood vessels, this network, and the blood is really the vehicle that carries oxygens and nutrients and everything else that our cells need to survive. So when we have the right amount, all of our organs are functioning properly. Sometimes we need a few extra blood vessels. So if you're working out and trying to build your muscles, when your muscles get bigger, it requires more blood vessels, bigger blood supply, no problem. Your angiogenesis system can actually supply and help to grow more of those blood vessels, but they keep it in proper volume. So not too many, not too few blood vessels. Very important principle of angiogenesis. That's health. We have good circulation. Now, here's what happens in disease. When you don't have enough blood vessels, what are some of the typical diseases that occur when you don't have enough blood flow? Well, one of the things is after a heart attack, if you cannot grow enough blood vessels, parts of your heart will get weaker. You can get heart failure, and a heart attack can actually be even fatal if you have inadequate blood vessels to try to bypass any temporary blockage. Same thing as a stroke. We know after there's a stroke, sometimes a clot gets sent to the brain and results in that type of stroke. Your angiogenesis defense system is scrambled to be able to immediately generate tiny little bypass vessels, get around that blockage to save the brain beyond the blockage. If you can't get enough blood vessels growing in that situation, parts of your brain die, and you wind up being paralyzed or having deficits after a stroke. In diabetes, many people with diabetes lose their legs. They have their legs amputated, mostly because they have problems healing wounds on their feet. Yeah. Now, the reason is because their nerves actually go numb. Their nerves die back, diabetic neuropathy. And the reason that the nerves die back is because there's inadequate blood vessels feeding those nerves. So now in diabetes, some of those nerves in your feet and even your fingertips actually don't have enough of a blood supply. They die. When the nerves die, you can't feel when you step on a pebble and you create a little hole, that hole gets infected. That wound now also won't heal because it doesn't have enough blood vessels. That's an example of inadequate angiogenesis and cause a problem. And so now medical treatments actually have been designed to actually try to stimulate more blood vessels, to coax more vessels in where they're needed, but foods can also help do it as well. On the flip side, when you have too many blood vessels, and this is where cancer comes into play, it turns out that we all have cancer in our body. I mean, everyone fears cancer. The word actually, causes a shiver to run down most people's spine. Yeah. Everyone knows somebody who's been touched by cancer. And I would say most people know somebody who's died of cancer, actually. And so this is actually one of the most fearsome diseases, but yet biologically, we are actually all forming cancers in our body all the time, because all it takes for our 40 trillion cells to do is to make those little mistakes. Remember, I told you 10,000 mistakes are fixed every day. A few of those stinking through will turn into a microscopic tumor, microscopic cancer. And this is called cancer without disease, because a tiny little mutant cancer can grow up to the size of the tip of a ballpoint pen, and then it's frozen like a pimple. Can't go any bigger because it doesn't have a blood supply. No oxygen, no food, nothing to feed it. And so those little microscopic cancers sit there until another one of our defense systems, our immune system, wings by like a cop on a beat and sees this abnormal cell sitting on that street corner in a good neighborhood, and then says, "Get in the car, we're taking you away." And so our immune system destroys these microscopic cancers. But some microscopic cancers are able to hijack our body's regular angiogenesis defense system and selfishly grow blood vessels to feed themselves. Now, I worked in a lab studying angiogenesis, and we discovered that once an avascular or bloodless cancer is able to get vessels to touch it, the moment that that touches it, the cancer can grow 16,000 times in 2 weeks. So literally, angiogenesis out of control is a trigger, an explosive trigger for tumor growth. And in fact, we know that if you can cut off the blood supply or prevent tumors from growing their blood supply, you can actually keep these cancers harmless for long periods of time. And so this is what foods are able to do. Foods that inhibit angiogenesis, they won't stop the good blood vessels from growing, because good blood vessels are actually solidly locked into your body. Your defense system ensures you're not going to get rid of your good blood vessels with food, but those extra blood vessels tend to be fragile, and those are the ones that the foods that we eat, and then if necessary, drugs that we can prescribe can really just kind of shear those extra vessels away.
Yeah, this whole sort of field of angiogenesis and blood vessels, I think, is going to be fascinating for people, because I think many people, everyone's aware that they've got blood vessels inside them. I think a lot of people will think, yeah, I sort of learned this in biology at school, that there's a heart and it, the blood vessels, it pumps oxygen around the body. That's how oxygen gets to all my muscles and organs. But potentially it kind of ends there. Like, it doesn't go beyond that. And what I love about that explanation is when angiogenesis is not working well, we're not able to make new blood vessels where we need to, it can cause a whole multitude of different diseases. But also when it's kind of out of control or gets to these cancer cells, too much angiogenesis can cause problems. And therefore the question for me, Dr. Lee, is if angiogenesis sits at the heart of multiple different conditions, so we can look at it as a root cause, we also say similar things about chronic unresolved inflammation, don't we? We talk about inflammation being a root cause of lots of these chronic diseases. So can you speak a little bit about the relationship between inflammation and angiogenesis? Because it strikes me that they can't be separate. They probably sit side by side together in most cases.
Yeah, no, it's such a great question. I actually worked on research exactly looking at that interrelationship.
Wow.
So we know, well, let's take a look at just sort of something everybody recognizes, and to show how inflammation and blood vessel growth go hand in hand. If you are in the kitchen and you accidentally cut you're cutting a piece of fruit and you accidentally cut your finger or cut your hand, what's going to happen? It's going to bleed. All right. Now, so you're going to stop the bleeding. Then a few minutes later, you look at the cut. What's going to happen? It's swollen, it's puffy, it's red, because inflammation's actually gotten there. Your immune defenses have sent these inflammatory cells. These are the kind of super soldiers from our immune system that go there to kind of clean up and prevent any bacteria from rushing into that site. And then shortly thereafter, within a day or so, new blood vessels start growing, because the inflammatory cells, the cells from your immune system, started to release some signals to say, hey, you know what? We've cleaned up. It's time to reset the table. And so now blood vessels actually start to grow into it. So inflammation sends the signals for wound healing, for blood vessels to grow. By the same token, inflammation then goes away, which is why our wounds don't stay puffy the whole time. The puffy and redness goes away. The blood vessels grow, you get a scab, and before long, you're back to normal. And that's because both inflammation is turned off, like that's that car volume of the car radio, and also angiogenesis, once you get enough, it stops. And so this is getting back to that set point. Now, what happens when you actually have chronic anything? Usually it's not a good result. So inflammation being really good, a little bit is really good. So, I think a lot of people misunderstand, like, I want to get rid of all the inflammation in my body. No, you don't, because you want the ability of your body to be able to mount small amounts of inflammation when needed for a short period of time and then to go away. All right. That's you want that. That's life-saving. But what you don't want is for that inflammation to get there and the volume to keep turning up, or that it never gets turned back down. That's chronic inflammation, and that's abnormal. So your body, this whole idea of turning up and then turning down the volume for inflammation. If you can't turn it down, the inflammation continues to smolder in your body. An example I've given is sort of like for anybody who's listening who's enjoyed going camping.
Yeah.
You go into woods, you set up a tent, it gets cold at night. What do? You build a campfire. And that's like a little bit of inflammation, gives you warmth that serves its purpose. And, when it's time to go to bed, you either let it burn down and you just, make sure that it's all walled off and you're fine. But that fire, if it doesn't burn down, but actually spills out and catches the forest on fire, now you actually got a problem because now this thing is going out of control. And diseases with chronic inflammation, like lupus, like rheumatoid arthritis, like diabetes, frankly, you wind up actually having this chronic inflammatory state that starts to provoke all kinds of other things. And remember we talked about tumors and angiogenesis. Well, if a tumor is kind of like a wound, it can hijack blood vessels and you got inflammation and now the cancer itself causes some inflammation, you're just making it a hell of a lot easier for that tumor to get a blood supply, which means that the cancer is more likely to grow. And in fact, we do see this in patients who are actually chronically inflamed. We know that inflammation is one of those hallmarks for people who develop cancer.
Hi there. If you enjoyed watching this video, I know you'll love the next one. Stay here and check it out, and I'll see you there.